To be fair, Drew also wasn't helped by the fact that his wide receiver core was virtually non-existent at times.
Of course, we're going to start with Drew Allar. And just in regards to his evaluation last season, if you look at the stat sheet, anyone would take 25 touchdowns against 2 interceptions to start out. He, of course, was scrutinized against the likes of Ohio State and Michigan in particular. What are your thoughts about Drew Allar and what's being talked about in regards to his next step?
Well, like you said, I mean, if you had told me at the beginning of last season that Drew was going to throw for 25 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions, I would have been all over that. I would have thought, okay, well, maybe they'll win the Big Ten with those kinds of numbers. But what it doesn't show is, that it was a lot of with Drew. There's a lot of checking down, just going. Usually quarterbacks, it seems, if they have a problem with checkdowns, it's they don't check down quickly enough. They lock in on their primary target and try to force something that's not there. It's kind of the opposite with Drew. He tended to check down too quickly if his primary guy was being covered in the slightest bit, instead of maybe trying to throw them open. So it seemed like a lot of short gains, like it's the safe play, and yeah, you can move the ball and rack up some yards against most of the opponents on the schedule. But when it comes to the Ohio State and Michigans on the schedule, that's not going to cut it. And of course, he had his issues when going up against more stout defenses like Ohio State and Michigan were able to give him. And to be fair, Drew also wasn't helped by the fact that his wide receiver core was virtually non-existent at times. Really, the tight ends were the saving grace in the passing game with Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren. But aside from Keandre Everett-Smith and maybe occasional appearances from Trey Wallace when healthy, and perhaps a few catches from Liam Clifford here and there and Omari Evans, it was pretty. The pickings were very slim from the receiving core, so it was very tight end dependent. And of course, didn't help the running game was just lacking explosive plays for most of the season up until the last few games of the year when ironically enough, it was after Mike Yurcich got fired. It seems they opened up the ground game, but just it was a combination of, I think, Drew maybe playing a little too timidly, like just I don't know what the coach staff was telling him, but they might have been. I think they were emphasizing more just not making mistakes instead of taking a chance here and there, maybe taking some shots deep. And I think maybe you remember this, Mark, because it kind of made national headlines. But one of the Penn State beat writers, Corey Geiger, last year famously called in and asked him about, do you ever tell you guys just chuck it deep? And prompted like a puzzled response from James, which ended up going kind of viral. But it kind of became like a bit of a running joke. Like half of the season, we did see Drew chuck it deep a few times, and it actually helped. I'd say it was the reason they managed to avoid an embarrassing upset at home against Indiana, as he hit Lambert Smith in the final couple of minutes to break a tie game. But I would like to see hopefully more aggressiveness out of Drew in his second year, and I think what I've seen from Andy Kotelnicki, the new offensive coordinator, from what I've seen from highlights of what his Kansas offenses have done, and just what you've seen from spring practice, just with his fiery demeanor and how the players have really taken a liking to him almost immediately. He's a guy. Koenig is a guy who doesn't matter what type of quarterback you give him, if he's a pocket passer or a dual threat, he seems to get the most out of what he has to work with. And I have confidence that you'll see an improved Drew Allar in year two. What exactly that looks like, we'll see. But I trust that Andy Kotelnicki can get him to strike that balance between, of course you don't want to be making making reckless throws, but at the same time, you're gifted with this great arm. Use it a little more often. If throw your guys open, it may not, just because they're not 100% open doesn't mean you can't hit them for a big gain. So I'm hopefully, the more he's working with this new offense, and obviously now he's going into his second year as the guy, as the big man on campus. So, this is old hat to him. So we'll see. Hopefully that year 1 to year 2 jump is much bigger for Drew.
And maybe the most important or most impressive aspect of him throwing that game-winning touchdown pass against Indiana was that he had just thrown his first career interception. And so if there was a time that you would think he might have been even more gun-shy because, shock, this has never happened to me before, he went and hit the game winner down the right sideline. Ethan Gruckenmeyer is, of course, the prize prospect for the future. He's just going to have a very, I don't want to call it an easy ride this year, but just learn, sit back, and learn. But there should be a pretty good battle for the number 2 job, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bo Buell right now is probably your de facto number 2 quarterback, as he was last year. I know Jackson Smolik, who was number 3 quarterback last year, reportedly have been doing well in practice, and I think he even got some playing time, a little bit of playing time in garbage time last year, if I recall correctly. But so it'll be interesting to see how that battle goes between those two in spring practice. But I would not sleep on Ethan Grunkmeyer, 4-star kid. I believe he has the same, out of Ohio, he's the same private quarterback coach that Drew Allar had, Brad Mandler. So it's like Brad Mandler to Penn State pipeline being worked there. But, kid's more, from what I gather, he's more the dual threat type compared to Drew, a little more mobile, but also pretty good arm. I'm curious to see if he can maybe work his way up the depth chart during the spring and summer, and perhaps make a push for at number 3 or maybe even that number 2 spot behind Drew. But he's a guy that I'm excited to see him in the future and see how once Drew's off to the NFL, if he can rein in the starting job. But that's for another time.
Talking Penn State football, we've got Tim Aiden here, of course, from Black Shoe Diaries. You can catch Tim. Patrick Corbler hosted our post game here the last few years